Sally Rogers here. Welcome to day 133 of A Song a Day Keeps the Virus Away. Indeed. Oh, that little ball is going around and around, but I think that I am actually live. Yeah, well, as soon as I see a comment, I'll know that I'm live. It says I'm live for 7 seconds. So, yes, I guess I am. So, welcome today. I've decided today to share with you a song that was written with kids in the fourth grade at Lebanon Elementary School quite a while ago. I think it was year 2000, right around then. And it was a residency honoring Lebanon's tercentenary. You've heard a couple other songs from that residency that I wrote. Well, this is one that the kids wrote, and it was, they discovered that on a map of 1847, I think it was, or 1867, they discovered on a map of 1867 that there were no men on the map. All the properties were labeled with names, but there were very, very few women. In fact, they could only find one that they were absolutely sure was a woman, and it was Grandma Lillie. It even said Grandma Lillie. And Grandma Lillie was farmer's wife in Lebanon, and apparently, I can't remember if her husband died or if she was unmarried all her life. But in any case, she lived in this little house, and she always wanted to vote. And when she was 100 years old, she was able to register to vote in in 1920 when the 19th Amendment was passed. But sadly, she never was able to vote because she died 6 weeks before the actual election. And the kids were horrified by that. They said that was just so unfair. How could that be? And then we looked at the women who had been at the Seneca Falls meeting in 1848, and the 68 women who signed the Declaration of Sentiments in 1848. Of those 68 women, only one lived to see the 19th Amendment passed. Susan B. Anthony never got to vote. Elizabeth Cady Stanton never got to vote. Lucy Mott never got to vote. And they were just amazed by that. And it was a wonderful lesson in the idea that you can work for something and maybe never see the fruits of your labor, but it doesn't mean that your labor was in vain. And as we work in this election season, I think that's a very important thing to think about. I just want to read you a little thing from the Women's Museum in Seneca Falls about the woman who survived. Only one woman lived to see the 19th Amendment passed. She saw it passed, but she didn't actually get to vote. She was sick on the day of the election. But anyway, this is about Charlotte Woodward, who did live to see the amendment passed. In 1920, 72 years after the Seneca Falls Convention, the United States finally passed the 19th Amendment, giving women the right to vote. Of the 68 women who signed the Declaration of Sentiments at Seneca Falls in 1848, only one, Charlotte Woodward Pierce, lived to see that day. Quote, I was at the first meeting held at Seneca Falls, she remembered, when I was but a young girl, little knowing the broad field awaiting laborers. In 1848, Charlotte Woodward was 18 or 19 years old, probably of Quaker background, and living in Waterloo, New York. Although she'd been a school teacher when she was 15 years old, she worked at home in 1848, sewing gloves from pieces sent out by merchant capitalists. Charlotte Woodward was not happy with her limited opportunities. Quote, I do not believe there was any community anywhere in which the souls of some women were not beating their wings in rebellion. Every fiber of my being rebelled, although silently, for all the hours that I sat and sewed gloves for a miserable pittance which, after it was earned, could never be mine. I wanted to work, but I wanted to choose my task, and I wanted to collect my wages. With such awareness, Charlotte Woodward was delighted when she read the announcement for the Women's Rights Convention. Historian Retta Child Dorr described Charlotte's reaction based on an interview with her in 1920. She ran from one house to another in her neighborhood and found other women reading it, some with amusement and incredulity, others with absorbed interest. Half a dozen of Charlotte's intimate friends were interested enough to agree with her that they must attend the convention, at least on the first day when only members of their own sex would be present. Early on the morning of July 19, those country girls started on their long drive. They had a 40-mile drive. in a Democrat wagon drawn by fat farm horses. And as they drove along, they perceived an unusual number of vehicles, family carriages, chaises, surreys, Democrats, and even farm wagons turning in from lanes and byways to join the procession on the main high road. Women formed the majority of the passengers, but some of the vehicles were driven by men. When the girls arrived at the Wesleyan Chapel in Seneca Falls, they found about 50 men waiting to be admitted to a meeting advertised for women only. Mrs. Pierce remembered that it was the presence of these uncommonly liberal men that gave her courage to stay over for the second day's session. So she traveled, as I said, about 40 miles, and she lived in Philadelphia the rest of her life. And in 1921, when she was 92 years old, she sent a trowel to the National Women's Party, which she had been a member of, to be used in laying a cornerstone for the National Women's Party's headquarters in Washington, D.C. The inscription read, "In memory of the Seneca Falls Convention in 1848, presented by the sole survivor, Mrs. Charlotte L. Pierce, in thanksgiving for progress made by women and in honor of the National Women's Party, which will carry on the struggle so bravely begun." So, Charlotte Woodward Pierce, she survived. Well, this is a song written by those kids in Lebanon about some people who didn't survive, and it has a lovely chorus that they chose from a quote from Susan B. Anthony, very famous quote, "Failure is impossible." I gotta go here, I guess, yeah. Elizabeth Stanton was a suffragette. We still follow her silhouette. She fought for women's right to vote with every word she wrote. Failure is impossible, especially if you try. They won the fight for women's rights long after they died. Elizabeth Stanton was a suffragette. We still follow her silhouette. She fought for women's right to vote with every word she spoke. Failure is impossible, especially if you try. They won the fight for women's rights long after they died. Sojourner Truth was a suffragette. We still follow her silhouette. She fought for women's right to vote with every word she wrote. Failure is impossible, especially if you try. They won the fight for women's rights long after they died. Susan B. Anthony was a suffragette. We still follow her silhouette. She fought for women's right to vote with every word she wrote. Failure is impossible, especially if you try. They won the fight for women's rights long after they died. Grandma Lillie was a farmer's wife. She wanted to vote her entire life. In 1920, she registered to vote, Lebanon's woman of note. Failure is impossible, especially if you try. They won the fight for women's rights long after they died. Grandma Lillie came so close. She died just weeks before the vote. Her dreams, they did not go away, and like her we will say, failure is impossible, especially if you try. They won the fight for women's rights long after they died. Now all of us our votes may cast. Since the 19th Amendment passed, we'll remember those who came before, who opened freedom's door. Failure is impossible, especially if you try. They won the fight for women's rights long after they died. Failure is impossible, especially if you try. They won the fight for women's rights long after after they died. That's the song about Grandma Lillie. And now we can all remember Charlotte Woodward Pierce, who was the one woman from that Seneca Falls Convention in 1848 who lived to see the 19th Amendment passed. Now, let's see, tonight, if you're not busy at 7 o'clock Eastern Time, 6 o'clock Central Time, I'll be giving a concert for the Daniel Boone Regional Library in Columbia, Missouri. But I'll be doing it right from here. And one of the very few joys of COVID is that you can come to, because it'll be Zoomed. So the link is already there, but I'm going to put a new link so you can for sure find it, and you can download it. And if you can't come tonight, the library will be saving it, and you can watch it later. Just contact the library to find out exactly how to watch it, or get on my email list, because I'll put it in my newsletter, and that you can do by going to www.sallyrogers.com. And with that, be well, be safe, and I'll see you tomorrow, another Friday already. Bye-bye.